Hello everybody and welcome back to Fewladelphia, where before we begin today I have to say a massive shout out to Bobby Hoskins. Your comment on the last video made me go a little bit insane, to be honest, actually. If anyone's watched my Planet Zoo content, you'll know I sink trees into the ground for undergrowth all the time. Why have I never thought about that in CS2? So you can see here, thanks to Bobby's little kind of reminder suggestion that I should be doing this, and I had never thought of it, sinking those bushes instead and never actually big trees. But we do now have a revised castle moat. As you can see here, so we've got some big oak trees sunk into the ground to create our undergrowth look, and it looks a lot better not having those stark kind of cliffs there. So, Bobby, thank you so much for pointing out my absolute brain fart is the only thing I can put it down to. Thank you. I'm going to be sinking trees all over the place. And that brings me on to what we're doing today. So we are doing the second part of our Filling the Gap episode. We're going to be adding a football stadium to start off with, a big, large park area, a welfare office, and some surrounding offices and housing around that too. So all thanks to your amazing suggestions. So we're going to kick off with the football club for Gordie Bay. Of course, as a little reminder, let's actually just head on back over to the outskirts over here. We do have Fewhaven Football Club on this side. Very kind of neat and trimmed, nothing too spectacular about it, on the edge of a sort of outskirts parkland over here. We're going to do something a little bit different with Gordie Bay's football club. We're going to make it slightly more rundown and less well maintained, in keeping, I suppose, with the vibe of Gordie Bay altogether. And then we're also going to add a very small housing estate around it. Now, a slight change to the plan I mentioned in last episode, where I said I was going to put the football stadium somewhere here with a housing development over this side. We're actually going to shift it, so the football stadium is going to be attached to Gordie Bay. That makes more sense to me. And a very small little new build housing estate around it, just in this corner on the Gordie Bay side. So the park will now wrap around it and extend right up to the edge of Fewhaven, to the back of the station over here, and then down towards the waterfront this way as well. So that's the slight change to the plan, as I came and really thought about this for a third or fourth time. So with that, let's dive right in. So I'm going to start by placing in the football club, and we're going to have this nice and snug up next to the rail line over here, because I feel like that's kind of an appropriate place. They're not going to mind the noise from the rail's not going to mind the noise from the football ground. So we can have the actual stadium elements backing onto it, and I'm not going to make this a big kind of custom stadium or anything like that. I just feel like Gordie Bay just needs a local community football team to compete with Fewhaven's football team all the way over the other side, and we'll save any big stadiums for around the downtown area. This is really suburban, smaller towns that we're building out here ultimately, not a great big city, so I don't feel like a big stadium is going to be appropriate for this area. So how we're going to connect it up, we need to have a road connection on this side, so let's just bring out an alleyway road for the moment, just up to here. And I think we're going to have the housing estate come out of a connection this side. Now, this is actually the main junction here, so I feel like this is probably going to be more appropriate, but that eats into our park quite a bit. So I think I'm going to use this intersection here along Main Street, where we go off into a very small housing development that side. We're going to use this to bring this out into our development this side. So I think I'm going to use the alley with sidewalk for this, just so we don't get too many road markings and that sort of thing, but we do get an actual sidewalk with it, which I think will be wanted for this space if we've got residences out here. And the idea isn't that this is like big luxury footballers' homes, it's just a very simple new build housing estate. I'm taking a little bit of inspiration actually from around Salisbury Football Club. If we go back to Google Earth, we can have a little look quickly. This is the football club I noticed when I was looking at Old Sarum that we took inspiration for the castle. And I just think that this would fit in pretty nicely here, being a kind of slightly out of the main town centre football team. Okay, it seems to be right in the middle of our two towns in this case, but I think it will fit and I think it will work. And then around this we can use alleyway roads to bring off some stems for some additional housing. So I quite like the housing to be relatively close up to this edge. So let's give ourselves a road somewhere about here. I'm actually going to make these curvy so it's a little bit more interesting, and kind of like a developer's come in and designed this area. They've taken over this area of the park and added all of these new build houses. And for this, we're actually going to be using the UK pack assets. So I want them to all kind of look very, very similar, very samey. as if it is a development as opposed to any kind of like housing that's popped up over time. It was all created at one time surrounding this football club that we have here. So I think something like that is going to be plenty for what we want. We don't really need any more than that. We can go ahead and use the new cul-de-sacs on the end here, I think, just to create a little turnaround point for these different developments on each end, something like that. Pretty simple. So let's filter on small, and then we'll also filter by lot width of 2, and you'll see we'll get all these houses up here. Now I kind of don't want the depth to be too much, so we're probably looking at this section here, I think, which are all pretty much the same size, but it's very slight variations on the houses. And then we can mix in some of these potentially as well. Trying to think if there's anything else similar. So there are some larger lot depths that we can use in certain places, so we can add those in as a mixture as well. And then find out, I've set up a key binding to filter through these assets that we have here to select random ones if we click tab on the keyboard, which is very useful for when we're filling this in. So let's go ahead and get in our houses, and then we'll come back to the football ground and the car park and what we're doing with that. So just like that, they all kind of look very similar. I hope it looks like a developer's come in at least and developed up the space. We'll put in a few young trees and things like that around it. I kind of don't want any big old trees, apart from maybe one or two strategically placed that the developers had to keep as part of their plans due to a tree protection order. That's what I'm thinking. But then the rest of them will all be young, like they've all been newly planted and waiting to grow up. That's kind of what I want for this area. And obviously we need some kind of sound protection, a bit more detailing. I think I'm actually going to bring the fences up almost to the road here to make these gardens look a little bit of a different shape. We won't do too much of that, just in a few strategic places such as here. And then I've left a little gap at this point where we can have the path come out and join the big main park path going through the woodland and the countryside that's going to be out here. Well, the parkland that's going to be out here, because it's not really countryside when it's smack bang in the middle of all of this development, but there we go. And I'm also thinking in this space here that we might actually turn this into a building site, kind of similar to what we've got over here in Gordie Bay. something that looks like it's about to be land that's developed on or land that's been sold potentially to a developer to extend this neighbourhood maybe over this side. But we'll come back to that a little bit later in the episode. But for the moment, I want to talk about the football pitch here, because I do want to keep this pretty simple. So I think what I'm actually going to do is upgrade this section to a gravel road like that, and we'll help it blend in a little bit better at the end here around the stadium complex. And then this side, I very much want it to be an open concrete space, which has car parking spaces on it. So we'll use some of Dome's invisible parking spaces for this. So like these ones, which we're not going to be able to see, but cars will still be able to park here. And we'll just turn it into a big kind of dirty concrete yard that is used for parking on match days. Exactly like Salisbury Football Club. If we flash back to that for a second, you'll see what I mean. So something along those lines. So it's a very different, less manicured vibe to Fewhaven Football Club over the other side of town. Now obviously we already have invisible parking spaces up this side as part of the actual football field, so we kind of want to respect those a little bit. So we're going to bring out the road, I think, just about here. So let's actually just pull this back a tiny bit. And then what I might do here as well is try and add in an extra node so that we can upgrade the first part to an alleyway road. So there's a bit of concrete in there like that. And then we can delete out this little bit of extra. Yeah, so we can have those skid marks kind of going into the car park. We'll follow them on with a bit of detailing in just a second. So for the moment, let's trim off these surfaces here because I don't like them. We'll re-put them back in. We can keep this one this end for the moment, and we might upgrade that, blend it into the gravel road a little bit better like I mentioned. But let's go ahead and get ourselves a nice plain asphalt surface in here. And I think I'm going to use the old sidewalk one, which we've used elsewhere. So we're going to bring it almost up to the back of these houses, and we'll have a big kind of tree border in between the two and right up to the edge of the football field like that. Now we do have fencing along here, so it's not like they can just kind of walk onto the pitch. I'm realising these are probably the player stands at this side, so it's maybe not the most protected thing in the world. It would be better if the football pitch was the other way round, but I don't really want the road flowing through the middle of the park that side. So we may use some barriers or something to curve that off in just a second. But then, yeah, we want to grab Dome's invisible parking spaces and drop in a whole load of these. Now the trouble is, hello, Editing Few here. There really isn't any trouble with this bit. In fact, the next 10 minutes of this recording is total garbage, as I was making a very simple job incredibly complicated by forgetting to hit this one tiny little button to show invisible markers. So yes, the gist is hit this and then you can see where you're placing invisible networks and parking spaces. So we're going to skip over this bit and just continue on as if nothing happened. And there we can see our actual parking spaces. And I don't mind that they're all super random. I will stop some of these from overlapping for sure. But the randomness is going to help this feel quite natural, I think, in terms of a car park that maybe some wardens have directed people into, that sort of thing, to get them into their spaces. There is a fair amount of overlap, so I need to tidy this up a little bit, but I do want them all kind of wonky and wiggly so that it feels like natural parking, like I said, and hopefully we'll actually see people parking in here. I'd like to hope so anyway. Once we get the park in and we get some features within that, hopefully we'll see a bit more of it. We don't have any parking on these streets as well, so that should help once these residents all move in and are able to buy a car. So then really what we want to do here is detail it up with some more skid marks, some tyre marks, definitely a lot of kind of broken concrete decals and dirty decals. And then we want to kind of blend the edge of it into the woodlands around it as well. But we'll also get a path going from the footy stadium into the actual main park area. And the other thing I'd like to do is definitely provide pedestrian access over the railway, over this road, and then down into the kind of harbour area. We've got offices down here after all, and industry. So I think giving people a way to safely walk over the railway is pretty important here. think we might upgrade these as well, just so that we can have a little bit more interest on them, particularly over the railway. I feel like a little covered walkway would be quite a nice thing. So yeah, let's have that there, and then also on this section beside the railway here. I think we'll just leave the top section open on this one. I'm wondering, can we get away with some kind of fancy bridge? I think that's probably a little bit too much for this road. This one could be nice actually, and could form quite a nice little feature archway if we just have a look. Kind of heading on into Gordie Bay, part of the kind of park. Oh look, actually it frames the water tower quite nicely there. Yeah. It may be a little bit OTT from a realistic perspective, but I quite like it from a design perspective and the location of it, so I think we're going to keep it. Well, let's just drop these down a little bit more and make sure they're not sticking over those lampposts. So we'll just bring them out a tiny bit further away like that. And let's move this tree, of course, so we don't have any clipping here. And then these pathways can all kind of blend into the park area. I think we're going to have another pedestrian bridge over this side. So we may as well add that in and add a path network in over here for now. I think what we'll do here is leave a kind of open centre square, not square, but geometric area, something along these lines. And what I would quite like is a suggestion actually that I will flash up the comment, hopefully if I can find it on the screen now, but a suggestion someone made where we could actually add in the invisible pedestrian path along this rail line so that people can actually walk along it, at least for a certain part of it. So I'm thinking maybe this kind of section here, I don't mind if they cross over at that intersection. So maybe we come off here out to that point and then we can connect in a regular path over here. We could even cross it with a path at this point too, just to add a bit of interest, and hopefully we'll actually get some pedestrians using that. We'll see with time. That needs sorting out there, but we'll come back to that. And we could do the same thing here as well with a bit of a level crossing for pedestrians. Obviously it's a disused rail line, so it doesn't really matter. Oh look, we have someone on it already. And I know that people were walking on it up here beforehand, so maybe we don't even need the pedestrian access there, but let's see if that helps at all. And then the park is going to kind of stop here with a line of offices, so it will extend both sides of the abandoned rail line, so that's going to be nicely encapsulated within the park, which I think will be a cool thing. A cool kind of random little feature to have in it, at least. So it looks a little bit, it looks a lot jumbled actually right now, and I'm just thinking to myself, we definitely want the path network extending on out this way. So let's bring these out into a triangle and go back to straight paths for this. Like that, and then we can bring it down actually pretty much to this crossing over here by this intersection, so that can be a point of entry. Now we have a lot of people walking along this road, and many of them actually, if we take a little look at some of the route tracker, okay, none of them are walking in this direction now. Wonderful, just as I need it. Take a little look at the route tracker, so we can see here, okay, they're going further along the street. When I was looking at this earlier and clicking on people, there were a fair few that were actually going to the bus station here. Now, one thing I definitely want to do after we've got this area in is come in and redo all of the different transit route lines, because I think that's going to tremendously help reduce the amount of people having to walk along here at the moment. I think these are the same two that we just clicked on, yes. But hopefully what it will mean by having this pathway and this park in here is that people do actually choose to take this route through the park, because that would be wonderful to see people actually walking through a large park area. Now, one of the features that I do want to put into it is a man-made lake, as suggested by Page of Aquarius. It's not going to be outside the welfare office, which is going to sit in this corner, but it's going to form part of this park here. So I'm thinking lots of nature and natural, heavily forested trees, so we can get in Martin Hune's suggestion there. And then it will come out into a big open area of the man-made lake, thanks to Page of Aquarius for that suggestion. And then go into a little bit more manicured parkland as we go through this end, probably with an actual park in here somewhere so that we can get some people attracted to the area. And then the rest of this will be kind of open green spaces in amongst tree-lined edges, I'm thinking, but a little bit more man-made than the natural forest end, which will come up here. And I'm thinking we'll probably have a gravel path running through this section, which comes out into concrete paths as we go round the, what I'm going to call the boating or the duck pond, which is going to sit this side of the football club. So before we come on to the last part, which is going to be the offices, the low rent housing and the welfare office, let's go ahead and detail out our housing estate, our football field, car park and our park as well. So we've got half the build in, and I quite like how this park has come out. I did just throw in a little bit of row housing and a couple of low density housing into this corner just around the castle. I feel like that's kind of untamed castle grounds in this corner, so I think that's fair. So let's have a look at the park first, and we've added in an actual park down this end, which is nicely filled with homeless people. Of course, I do need to do something about that. At some point, the Bye Bye Homeless mod perhaps needs to come in here. And we just kind of lined that with a few birches. I added a couple of extra props in here just to make it a little bit more interesting and extended the surface out towards the actual straight pathway that we put in there. And there's loads of people walking down here, which is really cool to see. I did see quite a few more actually walking around the pond earlier on. I think it's maybe dependent on when trains come in or such like, not too sure. But there are people walking around all over. You can see one guy over there, there's a few up here, there's someone over at the end. So yeah, and then we've got our man-made pond in, and I decided to put a little bit of extra surface trim around it just to make it feel a little bit more realistic rather than backing right onto the path here. I've got a couple of flower beds at either end and then this big fountain in the middle, with a tiny bit of pond growth as well in there. But wow, look at that, the reflection is just so cool, and it's actually true to life, this reflection. So if we had buildings around it, we'd actually be able to see them in here. But at the moment at least, of course, we're going to put some offices in just on the other side of the rail tracks there, so we may see the reflection of those potentially, but you can see the trees there. It's just marvellous. Absolutely marvellous, that's all I can say there. I did put a couple of little food carts in, lots of benches, bins, lights all the way around, and the manicured grass I did actually add in the end to these spaces around it, so it feels very man-made, decorative, that sort of thing. And then this extends onto more kind of open parkland, so we've got this tree-lined border here with a little bit of Sully's riverbed surface underneath, and then some more open green spaces. And kind of, if anyone's been to, I've forgotten the name of it, but the really large park in the centre of Amsterdam, it sort of reminds me a little bit of that, or that's what I was kind of thinking in the back of my head, where we have these big kind of open spaces with fountains and then treed, foresty type areas. It's even got an amphitheatre, I think, for shows and stuff in that park, but it's absolutely massive. Lots of open green space where people can come and take their lunch break and sit on the grass and enjoy the sun. Yeah, it's a sunny day in Fewladelphia. You may also just be able to get a sneak peek of the castle through the trees, potentially, depending on where you are there. And then this pathway goes on into our more forested area, so lots of natural dense forest here. It goes into a gravel path at this point. We've obviously got this connection through into the housing estate here. There's also a connection into the back of the football field car park, which people are parking in, and I love this. I threw in a whole bunch of decals, lots of tyre marks, as if people come here and practice their donuts maybe on the weekend perhaps. So yeah, really liking those invisible parking spaces here and how they work on this kind of open concrete field type thing like this. But yeah, the forested area, so we come on down here, it's pretty dense forest really all around, and now I did go down into first person to make sure the trees weren't overhanging too much, and they're not. But in places you can really hardly see the path because it is meant to be really kind of natural and overgrown in a very quiet place. And I have to say one thing with this is I was really listening to the game sounds for a pretty rare occurrence for me, and it's absolutely beautiful with all the bird sounds. Like, it actually feels quite relaxing, genuinely, looking around this forest. So I'm thinking we'll probably do some first person tours now we've actually joined up these towns together. Well, almost. We've still got that one section to go. But we'll definitely do that at some point. We've got a little playground in here as well. I wanted to try and add lots of park assets to try and encourage people to actually come to the area. So like here we've got a small playground, an actual sort of park seating area. I do want to fix that surface actually, so let's go ahead and do that. Just so that's closer up to the path there and we don't get that random green border. And we've got a little commercial unit in here acting as a cafe as well for this park with the actual covered seating on it, so hopefully that kind of makes sense. But yeah, that's the park area. Really like the pond, very pleased with that. And oh, of course we do have the extension over here where I've done a very similar thing, just open green space in the middle with a little kind of bandstandy type pavilion area, benches, bins, lights, and our funky pathway network that we put in before, all kind of surrounded by this tree border. I think the nice thing about this is that we can kind of come up to the castle, and if you're right up the top here, you're going to get views right out towards the downtown, right in the background over there. That's really where the central business district is going to sit, somewhere there, and you're going to have an uninterrupted view right down to it, so quite excited for that again. But also love the fact you can see over to the pond and the football pitch, and actually the pedestrian bridges as well are really kind of making something, I think, of these roads. Like, it's a nice feature to have a bit of an excessive pedestrian bridge such as this one, I think. You can let me know what you think in the comments below. We are going to want a name for our park, so again, let me know suggestions in the comments below, as well as the castle too. But let's come on to the final part of the build, the welfare offices, and a little bit of low rent housing. And starting with the welfare office. Now, I had a huge debate about which one to use for this. Like, I really like the modern architecture one. I also really like the Japanese one, but I feel like maybe that's a little bit too low-key for right on the centre of Few Haven here with these quite tall mixed-use buildings around it. So I have actually decided to go for the vanilla welfare office here. So let's go ahead and add that in, and then I am just going to use a little bit of Move It to get this as tight into the corner as possible. The one thing I'm keeping an eye on is this corner here to make sure it doesn't clip the pavement, but I think that that is okay. We're going to come in and change up some of this yellow surface. I'm just not wholly keen on it really, so let's go into the upgrade function and see if we can find, I'm thinking actually the same one as this. I'm pretty sure it's that one. It's almost the same, at least anyway. It looks like a slightly different colour here, but so I feel like that looks just a little bit more consistent going around there rather than having that yellow surface that we did have before. And then we can wrap this in a few little offices and some extra housing. So the way I'm going to do this, obviously we've got the park connections coming in here, so I'd like this to join up to a road which is going to house some of these offices on. So I'm going to use this junction that we've already got, and we're going to come out with, I think actually we'll use the alley with sidewalk road again, so we haven't got markings. It's almost like a kind of unmarked local road is what I'm thinking here. And we're going to bring this down like so, just like that, and that can house our kind of office park, which we'll come back to in just a second. And then I would also, and I think we're just going to use an alley road for this and come out of this junction here. But you can see here it's kind of clipping into the hedge, so I think if we align it to the back of this building and draw it straight in, we're just going to get a nice kind of slightly off funky intersection here, which I quite enjoy. And if we go into Move It as well, we can use the manipulation mode just to bring back this road here so that that crossing is nice and straight. And we could always do the same thing this other side as well if we want to. Just fiddle that a little bit just so that intersection's a tiny bit wider there. And then this is going to come out into low income housing. So I think we'll have a walkway or something going through into the office area, but no actual road connection there. So it's going to be two cul-de-sacs ultimately, one side for the offices, one side for the low income housing. So I think that that'll work nicely. I am seeing we're dipping down a little bit here, so I'm actually just going to make sure that node is the same height there. I don't mind a bit of dip at that point, I think that's okay. I wasn't too keen on that big kind of dip in that road there. So let's start off with the offices. We've got demand for everything, which is good news because we actually had quite a low demand for office earlier on in this episode. So we don't want to use France or any of the high ones. We want to use low density offices for this and create a bit of a nice complex for them. So we'll have one here, then we can bring in the pathway down the side of it, that side. We have got some much larger ones which we could incorporate, like this could go up quite nicely against the welfare office. Again, I'm conscious of this section coming out here, so I'm thinking maybe we have a car park behind whatever building is in this side. So if we actually go for something that's a tinsy tiny bit smaller here, so something like this. We've obviously got that hedge on the side, so instead of better bulldozing it off, let's just make sure that's aligned to the welfare office hedge so we can't really see the doubling up there. Now this one doesn't have a car park, which is good news because then we can add in our own, I think, at the back here. We'll grab a perpendicular parking alley road and I'm going to turn snapping off so we're not getting any weird angles for this. In fact, we could actually say snap to side of building and then it will snap nice and straight along the side there. And I think we just bring this up a tiny bit further and then we'll grab the alley road, go back into snapping here and just bring it straight out onto the street that side, which gives us a tiny bit of parking here, and we can add to it as well by adding in domes, so we don't have to worry about this corner not having anything on it. We can add some of Dome's car parking spaces into here. Now the annoying thing is the spaces are actually a very slightly different size to the ones that we have on this car park, so it may look a little bit strange, but we're going to have to try and ignore that a little bit. The other alternative is, of course, we create the entire thing out of Dome's car parking spaces, which is a reasonable alternative option if we wanted to do that as well. So let's grab one more. Like that. And then we can just come in and adjust the surface here. So actually we can't adjust them, interestingly, because it's a parking road, but what we can do is add in our own little extra section of surface for this part of the car park, just like that. So we'll come back and add a bit of detailing to it. But I think just in terms of a connection here, I think I'm going to pull this back just a tiny bit because then we can add in a pathway connection to here so it looks a little bit more seamless onto the car park from the side of the welfare office at least. And we'll try and blend that path in a little bit better a little bit later on. But let's go ahead and find ourselves a few more offices to sit in here. Like that, and then we can fill in this section with a little bit of car parking, I think, next to the pathway coming down, and we can do a nice little open green space with some picnic tables maybe for lunch over here. Now I do want to just shift some of these around because they look dodgy as anything, so let's align this one straight up with the welfare office and then we can start coming round a corner this side. And we can just fuse these two in together a little bit to make them seem like one company there because it's the same style of building. So I think that that'll work pretty nicely. Obviously a little bit more detailing still to do around it. But if we talk about the low income housing now, so I think it might be quite nice to actually have one larger tower block somewhere in here as a little bit of a kind of centerpiece to this area. And it would also, if we take a kind of wider angle shot, add this little extra pop in height before we come into the pops in height that we have down at Gordie Bay. So we have some taller buildings over that side of Fewhaven, but really nothing else over here. So I think one larger tower block might be quite nice, maybe not quite that high, maybe something more along this sort of height. So I think let's go ahead and drop that one in there, and we'll come back to that in just a second. And then I would like to use, I think, the French residential low rent buildings again to create a bit of a complex, because I feel like we're right next to the train station here, so low rent feels appropriate, and obviously we've got the welfare office, so we'll get the bonus from it. But I don't want anything too drastically tall that is going to kind of overshadow this part of Fewhaven. So let's see what we can do with some of these again. So I'm thinking a bit of a mix in heights would be nice. We could perhaps have a car park for the residences in that corner. And maybe we do a little bit more fusing to keep it interesting again. So we could add in this one, for example. In fact, actually, let's remove that. Let's go for the one that's the same height as this building. Here we go. And then we can just use move it to position this so that it's kind of appropriate with the windows. We're not cutting into anything. So we could actually leave that diagonal window out. Might look quite nice, but then we are getting a little bit of spillage there. How does that look? That's not too bad. Let's cut it in a tiny bit further. Yeah, there we go. So the windows all make sense like that, and we get this nice formation of it here. Can we fit in another block in front of it? Yes, we can. And we could make this one just a little bit longer, I think, by adding in a second one of these and seeing if we can just fuse this in somewhat sensibly to the end of it. Although we're blocking up the windows, which I don't like. So it might have to be just shifted back a little bit. Something along those lines. So let's move these back up against this road here. We've then got space for pathways between the buildings, which I quite like. And we can just add in a very small alley road up here and see if we can get that building connected in. We can, but now this one's saying it hasn't got pedestrian access. Okay, well that will work. It's not the best in terms of realism, but it works there. So we have this little complex in the background. Now, am I liking this tower block? This is the question. Is that in keeping? It's actually almost taller than the castle here, but I do think it adds quite a nice dynamic to the sort of skyline of Fewhaven. So I think we're going to keep that. And then, yeah, we can add in a small amount of car parking into this space here. We can add in some pathways and some gardens around the building this side. So, yeah, I think that will do pretty nicely for our welfare office and low rent housing and office park combination in the corner here. We just take a look at the wider shot. I think it fills in the space quite nicely. And now, of course, in this bit, I'm also going to come in and do a bit of a construction yard. So let's go ahead and finish off this fairly monstrous build today. And with that, the gap is complete. So Fewhaven and Gordie Bay now merge, hopefully somewhat seamlessly, into one another. And I'm really, really pleased with this. I think it feels relatively organic how we've done it. Having that big green open space in the middle for so long felt very unnatural to me. But now that we've got these kind of different angular roads in here, a few little curves, some straight bits, the angular nature of the manicured pond park in the middle, and then the more natural forest and the castle, of course, as well there. And now our little office park in the corner. I think it's pretty natural and organic, hopefully, anyway. And what I particularly like is down here, you are on this relatively built up high street on Fewhaven, but then you do come down to this sort of small section of greenery as you go between the towns and into Gordie Bay here. And obviously maintaining that sightline for the castle over to what will eventually be the downtown. And lots of people still using the park and the pathways through here. Very, 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 very pleased with that. So I was really afraid by doing a big park like this, we'd just have no activity in it. So I'm somewhat reluctant to actually add a bus route between the two towns, because I think then we probably won't get as many people walking. However, I think it's necessary. So we're going to start the next episode definitely by looking at transit around here and refining that between Fewhaven and Gordie Bay, and then coming on to some more expansion. Let me know in the comments where you would like to go. Would you like to go into this section over here by Gordie Bay and out towards the lake? Or would you like to expand on this little corner and finish this off at the side of Fewhaven over here? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And of course, keep the suggestions coming for the name of our park over here and our castle as well. So the low rent housing, yes, rent housing, not income, as I keep incorrectly saying. This is slotted in nicely here. We do have people using the pathways in between the actual apartment blocks. I can see one person there at the moment, which is always very satisfying to see. We just dotted in a few extra benches and tables and flower beds and bushes and a few small trees for shade. So pretty pleased with how that's come out. Didn't do a lot actually to the welfare office. I think it sits in relatively nicely by itself like this. With the park in the background, the extra greenery around it is welcome in this case. I did just kind of make this car park feel a little bit more realistic and blend into the road around it, and extended some of the surfaces so it fit next to our curvy section of road a little bit better, but that was about it. And coming on to the offices, one thing I really like is actually the surface ability in CS2 and being able to just extend it around the corner here so that this office feels like it's meant to be on this curvy corner of road rather than placed in somewhere which it would rather probably be straight. So yeah, liking how that's come together. And then out the back here, we do also have this little delivery area, which I've manufactured out of surfaces, a picnic area for the workers to go and have a little green space to relax at lunchtime. Of course, our car park here, some more parking over this side, and then just connected in all these pathways through to the park. Yeah, there's someone using this one here. That is fantastic to see, and we do have people walking along the abandoned rail line at the end there at least too. And then finally over here, instead of having a construction site, I actually decided to go for a demolition site to make it look like there was some kind of large building here that's being demolished. So that's why we've still got these pillars up there. We've got some snowplows, yes, snowplows. They're sort of suitable-ish maintenance-looking vehicles, I thought, at least, pushing some of the rubble around, the trucks there to collect it. We've got road maintenance because they were the closest thing I could find to the type of vehicles I wanted to see in here as well. And then maybe some delivery of some extra beams for the new development or whatever's going here, just piling up at the back here. But very much wanted it to look like it was an old building that was in the process of being demolished here. We've got a little open gate down this end where the vehicles can come in and out, and I don't know, maybe further down the line maybe we'll actually develop it into something and change it up. You have to let me know what you think should maybe go here, or what would be built here in the event that they were actually developing this area. And there we go. I'm really pleased with this. I think it's come together nicely. I, again, just love this rail line flowing through this back end of Gordie Bay, and now it's kind of complete, coming past this housing estate here, past the demolition site, through the park and the football stadium, and on down into Fewhaven station over there. So yeah, there we go. The gap's complete, and this was a big build, to say the least. But if you have enjoyed the episode, likes, comments and shares are really greatly appreciated. If you'd like to support the channel any further, have a look in the description below for ways you can do that, including cheap gaming codes for instant gaming and of course Patreon as well. But that is all from me for now, so while you wait for new content, check out one of the videos on screen and I'll catch you again next time. Bye bye!